Hey everybody, welcome back. Hollywood Pizza here, and we got a big spoiler drop yesterday. By the time you're hearing this, you're pretty much going to see a lot more spoilers probably by now, but the spoilers that we have seen already, we're definitely going to go over in this video. I'm joined by HamHocks42. HamHocks, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing well, man. Looking forward to it. Yeah, the set looks dope, so I'm really looking forward to jumping into it with you.
Yeah, there's a lot of good cards. I think that the set is actually a reasonable power level so far in a lot of the things that we've seen. I still am almost holding on to that thought of every time a new set comes out, it's even more powerful than the set before. And I think that we're kind of like almost at that point where whenever I see some new cards being spoiled, I'm like, man, this set's already going to have an impact. Where previously, even like I'll say Midnight Hunt and stuff like that, like some of those cards we weren't sure if they were really going to get played, but by now I think that we all know that the power level of cards is kind of like a lot more higher,
hmm
higher ceiling. Blood tokens being the best example, where a lot of people were like, blood tokens aren't great, and then Blood Tithe Harvester is literally like one of the best two drops ever printed.
It's up there, man. It's great. Yeah.
It's like the
Well,
best
and a
uncommon
big
of the
reason
set.
is because of that blood token, to the point where even Valdarian Epicure is a great one drop because it just incidentally gives you a blood token in addition to pinging your opponent. Like it's almost as good as a 1/1 with haste. Actually, it's even better than a 1 with haste because it hits all your opponents. Like so you're in multiplayer situations.
And you
And
get a
then yeah, the
token
blood
that,
token's
yeah,
very real.
you can
Yeah.
cycle away later and use it for
hmm
your voltage surges or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But overall, I mean, this set's looking great. Hamhocks, where can people find you at on the
Yeah, so
regular?
I am on Twitch primarily, twitch.tv/HamHocks42. I'm also over on YouTube, HamHocks42 over there as well, where I post just rambly videos, talking over, individual card deep dives, news of the day. If you want to get kind of an unfiltered look at, and generally unedited, I'll be honest, look at, my take on the game, that's a good place to find it. Yeah.
Definitely, you can find my content as well on twitch.tv. I stream 4 days a week, including Sunday, where we host our tournaments, 3 a month, free to play with cash prizes. You can find all my content down below, as well as links to the tournaments as well. So, to jump right into this, the first cards that we're actually going to preview and talk about here are the Painlands. That's right, we've got more Painlands. Don't forget, the cycle wasn't done. We got 4 more in
hmm
Battlefield Forge, Land of War Waste, Underground River, and a Brushland. Hamhocks, can't stress enough how important just these four are. It makes all the three
hmm
color decks that are already good even better. And maybe some of the other ones that weren't able to exist now that the mana is a little bit smoother. Well, I say smooth, but it's going to come with some bumps considering you're going to take a few points of damage if you're really trying to
hmm
smooth it out. But yeah, these cards are just staples, obvious. Coming to play
Yep.
untapped. They add one of two colors of your choice. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of three-color decks out there that weren't part of the supported, weren't the shards that were supported in New Capenna that are gonna be very grateful to see these. Like, I love Sultai. Like, that's one of my favorite places to be, and that deck was very difficult to do. And same with Abzan, actually, another one that I really enjoy. And it's just tough to pull off because they're not an allied color, so we don't get a Triome. And then on top of that, like the important Painlands were missing to really make the mana bases in those decks sing. And yeah, we're gonna like to the point where I'm running things like Dismal Backwater, which I'm not happy running that in like a standard constructed deck. So I'm really glad that Underground River can slot into that spot now because it's gonna be much better.
definitely. Yeah, these cards are just important. Make a lot of different decks better. I am
hmm
excited to finally see the cycle completed. On top of that, we talked a little bit about this off of the video, but the flavor and the art of
Mm.
these are just phenomenal, and it's just really cool. I'm really pleased with these two sets so far. Dominaria obviously is out already, but seeing what we've seen from this set, I mean, I'm really happy flavor wise, and I'm really happy with the power level of the cards overall. And these are just another phenomenal like example of what they're doing with the set and kind of just like a homage to older players and obviously having cards that are very playable and standard at the same time.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up an interesting point about the flavor of these cards because there were 6 Painlands introduced in Dominaria United, And now there are 4 being introduced here in Brothers War. And usually when a set of lands, a set of 10 lands gets split between 2 sets, it's usually 5 and 5. But this time it was a little bit different. And I heard that part of the reason for that is because these 4 are depicting moments that were very relevant within the Brothers War itself. And so they wanted to save those for story reasons, not necessarily mechanical reasons, which I think is interesting. And that really is shown, it's really put on display with Llanowar Wastes. That art, we talked about it a little bit. I absolutely adore that art. I think it was beautifully done. And it depicts Llanowar, the forest of Llanowar, and in the distance you see some event happening. But you'll notice that the forest looks lush and green, and there's even a fairy that looks perfectly healthy and fine in the foreground of the image. The event that you see out on the horizon is actually Urza detonating the Silex, which is the moment. It's a huge part of the story. It's the bang that it all finishes with, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and so there's this huge moment, and so it's kind of this moment of disaster right before it hits Llanowar. And I just like, to be honest, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's like so well done and so perfectly captured in that artwork. And I mean, the same is true for like Brushland, Battlefield, Forge, Underground River. When you look at them, they clearly appear to be, you know, moments in this world spanning, world defining conflict. That's really cool. So I love it. I think they're great. As a standard player, I'm jazzed to see them because mana bases need some help. Just because standard mana bases always need help. Let's be honest. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
here we are.
Our next card is actually an interesting one because it's gonna have an ability that we're actually seeing for the first time here. Essentially being a reverse kicker. I called it a mule kicker, or mule kick on Twitter recently, but I think this card's pretty nuts. We got Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, 7 colorless, for a 7/5 with Menace Lifelink Ward. Pay life equal to this card's power. Um, so in order for it to be targeted by your opponent, they have to end up paying 7 life for this part of the card. Now, the interesting part about this card is that it does have the new ability called Prototype. 1 colorless, 2 black for a 3/3. So you can cast this card with different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So rather than spending the 7 colorless for the 7/5, you can spend double black and a colorless for a 3/3 that has Menace, Lifelink, and Ward equal to the card's power. So they'd end up spending 3 life rather than the 7. So what I always really like about cards like this is that they scale as the game continues, right? Like early on, you can just play it as a 3-mana 3/3. And then obviously later when you're like flooding out, you don't feel bad at all because then you're getting a 7-mana 7/5 with Menace Lifelink. That's actually kind of hard to target. Um, Especially depending on what life total your opponent may have.
Mm-hmm.
I think this card's really nuts. Obviously the real thing about Prototype and about this card specifically is you can blink it, quote unquote, so you can exile it from the battlefield, then put it back into play. And let's say that you only spent the 3 mana as a 3/3, and then the next turn you do it, it's going to come in as a 7/5. So you get, obviously that top notch value that way. But um, outside of, shenanigans like that, I think up front the card's pretty good, even at both sides of the mana cost of it. Ham, what do you think about this card? This card's pretty powerful, right?
Oh yeah, I echo all of that. Card's great. Like, and this is an interesting card to lead off the prototype mechanic with because this card is busted. And when our first look at a mechanic is busted, it's easy to assume this whole mechanic is going to be busted. If I'm not mistaken, when they spoiled Connive, Rafine was like the first or second card they spoiled with Connive on it. And I remember we were looking at it like, this is the most crazy thing ever. And then we saw the other Connive cards, like, okay, these are all good, but like, that one's the busted
Yeah, it
one.
wasn't
We
Rafine.
Yeah, we might have a situation like that here with the Flesh Gorger. Like, this card is cracked, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see other prototype cards that are nowhere near this strong. I do like the fact from like just a deck building perspective, if you want to take advantage of the prototype, if you want to be able to cast this as a 3-drop, you have to have black mana, which I think is kind of cool. So you have some flexibility in what kind of decks you put it in. You could put it in anything, theoretically, because it is a colored mana cost, but it definitely incentivizes you to be running it in black decks. And yes, being able to blink it, if you can drop this on 3, hit it with a Planner Incision the next turn, like, your opponent's gonna be crying. That's such a powerful effect that they need to somehow, you know, somehow disrupt. Because if this thing is allowed to swing for a turn, I mean that ward is almost like it's getting a free attack on your opponent if they try to remove it. Like, could you imagine if somebody targets this with removal, they pay the ward cost, and then you hit it with like you phase it
Oh,
out or
that's so
something, or hit it with a shore
gross.
up or something? Like that's disgusting.
That's just so messed up. Like it really, really,
Like,
really is.
yeah, this card's nuts.
Um,
And I'll be very interested to see what the other prototype cards look like.
yeah. I, yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. Abilities at scale are just so powerful. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that in a lot of different things. Obviously, like the dual face cards. Sleeper Agent was like I think that's what the card's called, right? The black one drop, I think is what it is.
Oh, Evolve Sleeper. Yeah, yeah.
Evolve Sleeper, yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Just cards that scale throughout the game are really good. I mean, I know black decks didn't really need a boost. This card is, I what I find interesting about it, it's not necessarily a boost considering there's so many powerful 3 drops in black.
Mm-hmm.
And you already have cards like Shieldred that maybe like a 7 drop isn't really what the deck cares about. But at the same time, I mean, it's still a good card to have in
Yeah.
your back pocket for when you really need it. And I think this card's going to spawn a lot of different archetypes. It reminds me of Titan, where it's just a really powerful card at like a high mana cost. So you're going
Mm-hmm.
to find ways to cheat it out. The blink side of it as well, maybe reanimate it. Yeah, I think it's just a really solid card, and I expect to lose to it quite a bit.
Yep.
I'm gonna see it and be like, oh, I can't kill this card. I think I will probably lose now.
Yeah. I wonder if those black like cheat death instants are going to become more popular with stuff like this, because you can imagine holding this back to block. They tag you with like an Adeline or something. You just put this in front of it, and then you hit it with like a fake your own death or something like that, and then it just comes back from the graveyard as a 7/5, and then you can swing with it the next turn. I mean, things like
Yeah,
that are gonna
I mean,
happen. I don't.
I
Yeah.
think that's really good. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I mean, there's a lot of different avenues you can go with the card, which is what I think that we forget is that we'll read a card and we're like, yeah, it's fine, but this card's a mythic. Like
Yeah.
some of these cards aren't going to have the rarity without it being for a reason. Obviously, limited aside, there's some cards that like this card should probably be a mythic because limited anyways, but at the same time, like we have to remember it's a mythic rare, so it's going to be a powerful card. This isn't a card that they're just going to make mythic and it's kind of like a dud.
Hmm.
There's a lot of quote unquote dud mythics that are still good in like Commander, that are still good in other different types of formats, but
Hmm.
a card like this up front, I mean, yeah, this is obviously like a powerful card. Kind of like reminds me of like Planeswalkers, where you read Planeswalkers and you're like, yeah, we know Planeswalkers are powerful, we just don't know what type of deck maybe that specific Planeswalker goes in.
Hmm.
So our next card here that we have is actually an uncommon. We've got Ashnod's Harvester, essentially the at-home graveyard trespasser. So 2 colorless, but hey, every deck can play it. So 2 colorless, 3/1 construct. Whenever this card attacks, exile target card from a graveyard, then you can unearth it for a colorless and a black. So for anyone who doesn't know, unearth, you get to return the card from the graveyard to the battlefield with haste, and then it gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step, or if it leave the battlefield, you can only unearth as a sorcery. I think this card is really good. I think we already knew Unearth was going to come back. Not sure if we did, but
Hmm.
Unearth is a good ability. I mean, it gives you options later in the game. It gives you haste. I think this card's really aggressive. I could see this in like a red black deck. Really good with anvil strategies, right? Because you can just sack it to the
Oh my
anvil,
goodness,
get a
yes.
1/1,
Hmm.
and then unearth this back. I think there's a lot of different applications for this card, and I expect this card to be in our top uncommons of the set
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a 3/1 for 2 is actually just an okay stat line already. Like in any deck that wants to be aggressive. I mean, having 3 power is meaningful. And then having a meaningful attack trigger on top of it in a colorless card. I mean, Magic's come a long way. Remember when a card being colorless meant it had to have some massive downside? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
remember. I mean, a 2 mana 3/1 back in the day. You're like, oh, that's pretty good, right? Like you feel like
right?
that's pretty powerful. Like 3 power for
Yeah.
2 mana is really good, and on top of that, this card has 2 relevant abilities. One being you can exile Tenacious Underdogs.
Yep.
Planeswalkers, things like that out of your opponent's graveyard that they might be able to get back with Takanumas. And then the second part of it is it's a recursive threat, even if it is for a turn. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we all know you can set up like a turn where maybe you get this and your own Tenacious Underdog back, and you know, you're coming in for 6, exiling a card, drawing a card. You know, you're doing a bunch of stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
we all know that those little points of value, all these extra things that you're doing in a game of Magic, really matter. You know, we've
Yeah.
found that out over the last 6 months to a year now, where we've seen a lot of powerful cards like Fable, like Graveyard Trespasser. You know, a lot of these cards that just do a lot. Wandering Emperor, they just do like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 3 to 5 things. So your cards all better be doing something. And I think Harvester is like a really good example of that as an uncommon, right? Like we're not really
Right.
saying this card's going to be breaking a format anytime soon, but I think it's like a pretty good, aggressively costed uncommon. I think that this is a card that we're going to see in competitive play, specifically, is what we're talking about. In other
Yeah.
formats, I mean, yeah, unlimited, this card's great. In EDH, I mean, it's an artifact,
Yeah, in EDH,
right?
there's some decks that actually wouldn't mind running it. I mean, it's also a construct token, which when you have all of Magic at your disposal, there might be some construct tribal synergies out there. It's possible. Um, yeah, I think it's just solid. Like it's just solid. Also, the fact that it has 3 power means that it could fuel casualty in pretty cool ways as well.
Ooh, that's a really good point. Yeah, it also
So,
crews. It can
cruise
crew some
bank,
expensive stuff. Yeah,
yeah, you can cruise
Bankbuster.
some, yeah, bankbuster and things like that. Absolutely. So
I wonder if this card
that's
started out as whenever it taps, you get to exile a card, and then they realized that that was probably going to be insane because you wouldn't need to attack with it. You're just like, yeah, I'll tap this,
I'm
crew
just
my
tap this all day.
Bankbuster or my
Yeah.
the hearse, and then
Or
exile 2 more cards off of hearse itself.
yeah, and mentioning Hearst is actually really relevant here too, because with Unearth being in this set, we already had Tenacious Underdog. I mean, Hearst was seeing a ton of sideboard play anyway. If there are some major Unearth threats in this set that see main deck standard play, I wouldn't be surprised if Hearst becomes a main deckable card. So
I
that's
mentioned
something
it
that
before,
might be a
right?
thing. Yep,
The
you
two
did.
cards I was
You
right
called
about
it.
were Rafine and Hearse, and
Yeah.
we're seeing the effects of both. I mean, Hearse gets played in literally every single format, and you're right, with
Mm-hmm.
Unearth coming back, I mean, a lot of these random, I mean, Trespasser, we've talked about Trespasser like 4 or 5
Yeah.
times now, but all these cards that kind of like piggyback on each other. I mean, your Harvester is great against your opponent's Harvesters,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Like it's good against
Yeah.
itself. It's
It
good
checks
in the mirror.
itself.
Like yeah, it checks
Yeah.
itself. Like it's going to be interesting to see where it ends up. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm just thinking like red decks and, you know, being able to kind of just like get it back and get some value and some damage, and
Mm-hmm.
just a really good card though. You know, like I said, it's a really strong uncommon that we expect to see in competitive play. So our next card here is actually a legendary creature making a comeback. We got uh, Titania, Voice of Gaia. So we have a colorless double green for a 3/4 reach elemental. Whenever one or more land cards are put in your graveyard from anywhere, you gain 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 more land cards in your graveyard and you both own this card and a land named Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, exile them, then meld them into Titania Gaia Incarnated. So we're going to go over Argoth as well. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, it's a land, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. It taps to add a green and then double green, 2 colorless, create a 2/2 bear token, mill 3 cards, activate only as a sorcery, and then when it flips over into the Gaia Incarnate, and that card is a elemental avatar legendary creature with a vigilance, reach, trample, haste. Power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. When this card enters the battlefield, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then 3 colorless and a green. Put 4 counters on a land you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste. It's still a land. So you start to animate your lands, and turn them into beefy threats at the 4/4. So up front, I think Titania. I'm sorry if I'm saying this wrong, but Titania is really good. Like I think, 3 mana, 3/4 with reach is pretty decent. On
Right.
top of that, let's say you're in the mill strategy, or um, you're discarding your land cards. I mean, this and Windgrace are kind of like best friends. Like you do this into Windgrace, and you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling pretty good. And then on top of that, let's say you happen to have the Argoth in your deck, maybe playing like a couple of them. It helps Argoth come into play on tap, but it also means that you're going to meld it into a pretty sizable threat. Like I think Teachings of Karen's into
Mm.
Titania, um, is going to be really good because let's say you mill a couple of lands and then you can play Argoth on turn 4, and then on turn 5 you're already flipping this into like a 5/5 or even bigger, maybe like a 7/7 if you mill 2 lands or more. And on top of that, let's say you're playing Fables where you're discarding cards. Like, yeah, I think this card's really strong, right? Like, I think the actual creature side of it's really powerful. I think the land is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's where you're kind of not really going to see this meld as much, but you know that the front side of it, the 3 mana 3/4 is really good. But like the land, most of the time is going to come into play tapped unless you have some random legendary cards in your deck. And yeah, obviously you can build your deck to kind of help that, but at the same time, when does your Argoth come into play? That's like turn 5 or 6, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
like rarely matters anyways.
Right. I mean, this kind of deck might be running Shijeki or something like that. So, like, all right, that's a legendary 2-drop that might be relevant. But to be honest, I'm guessing a lot of the time I'm gonna want to drop Argoth on like turn 1 where I don't have a play anyway, or something like that is how I'm gonna want to play it most of the time.
Yeah,
I
more
just
like a
accept that it
mid-rangey
comes in
grindy
tapped.
deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's the Simic card, Slumgar, right? Is that the one you were talking about earlier?
Oh, Slowgurk, the Overslime.
Slow Gurk. Yeah, yeah. I
Oh
think that
yeah.
that card's gonna be really good. I really think that there's like a land matters in the graveyard theme
Mm-hmm.
from a lot of different cards, and the fact that you're able to mill yourself as well. I think that that strategy gets a lot better with Titania and the Argoth, and I really
Mm-hmm.
feel like that deck might have some legs, like you're saying, like Shigeki and maybe some random other really strong green legendaries.
They gotta be out there, yeah. Yeah, you got I mean, Shigeki's great. I mean, by the way, I think it's pronounced Titania. I saw a production of Midsummer Night's Dream once, and they pronounced it Titania, so I assume
Okay,
that's correct.
yeah, Titania.
Um,
Okay.
I could be wrong, but yeah, yeah, I could also be wrong on that one. Um, but yeah, I think like getting Argoth untapped is nice. Like it will be a big deal if you can do it. If not, you'll be fine. But you're exactly right. We have a lot of Lance Matter stuff that cares about the graveyard. We have Spirit of Wingray, Soul of Wingrays. We have Slowgurk the Overslime. By the way, everyone right now is sleeping on Slowgurk the Overslime. I've played a couple games with it recently. Like I built a deck this week on stream, and it slaps. It's so good. That card's incredible, specifically with the Kamigawa channel lands. And the reason that I bring that up and the reason I'm going on my soapbox a little bit here is because of how well it combos with everything here. Because if you're hitting the channel lands and you're cracking like Riveteer's Overlooks and, Spara's Headquarters or whatever other like lands that auto sack that Evolving Wild style way, if you have those lands going, you can even have Evolving Wilds in that deck, frankly. Your graveyard's going to get full of lands super fast, so you're not going to have any problem flipping Titania, and you're going to get mad value when you do because of the Splendid Reclamation effect on Gaia Incarnate, bring them all out of the graveyard on the battlefield. Combine that with a card like Slowgurk. You combine that with a card like Tatiova, Steward of Tides. Because if all those lands are hitting all at once, they're going to all animate and fly. Like there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of synergy with that plan that is just waiting to happen. Like it's all coming together, and I think this might be like the finisher haymaker that style of deck needed to really take it over the top. Because if you meld this, your opponent's in a world of hurt
Yeah, it's
immediately.
gonna be a big card. It's gonna
Yeah.
be huge, like 5/5 or bigger, almost every single time. And
Oh yeah.
the fact that it has haste, I mean vigilance, it does everything. It's a really big card, and like I said, like just the 3 mana 3/4 reach, I'm already pretty satisfied with.
Mm-hmm.
In standard specifically, it gets around a lot of cards. It blocks a lot of things. I mean, it could block a Rafine for a little bit, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this card's. I think Titania itself is really strong, and then you're right. Like the melded side of it is like a game-ending card that if you get it off, like and your opponent's not able to kill it right away, they probably just lose.
Yeah.
Because you can just start animating your lands,
Mm-hmm.
and just that alone is powerful as well. On top of it being like a big beefy threat. So yeah, I expect to see this card in standard, and another card that I'm not looking forward to losing to. From my opponent being at like 30 life because they milled some lands off of like Titania and
Right.
what's there's like the other one from Midnight Hunt. It's a green black card. Had to bring your
Uh,
upkeep, you mill a card. Oh man, I can't remember what it's
Old
called.
Rothstein.
Yeah, Rutstein. Like there's so
Yes.
much
Old.
value, right, in
Yeah.
all these random cards that like mill. That if
Yeah.
you're like hitting
Exactly.
lands, you're just gaining a bunch of life. And like you said, like if you're playing some of the sack lands from Streets of Capenna, like you're gaining 3 life every time you go look for a land.
Right.
And you're
How
thinning
nuts
your
is that?
deck, and then you're playing like Soul Windgrace and you're getting that card back. Like yeah, I think all these cards are really really powerful, and I'm gonna be I'm not gonna be surprised, excuse me, if a deck that's more focused about lands going to the graveyard and recursing them is gonna be possible now
Hmm.
in standard. So next card here we're gonna touch on for probably not really too much time is Urza, Prince of Krug. So essentially there's like some uncommon Urzas and Mishras, and then there's the rare ones. So gonna go over the rare ones here. We've got Urza, Prince of Krug, 2 colorless for a white and a 2 colorless white and a blue for a 2/3. Human Artificer, artifact creature control, get +2/+2. 6 colorless, create a token that's a copy of an artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier, in addition to any of its other types. So Urza, Prince of Krug. I mean, that's fine, right? It's really expensive. It's really expensive up front for a 2/3, and
Hmm.
then it's really expensive for its ability. The mana one, the artifact creature you control get +2/+2 is obviously a really really stupid effect. It's like I forget what it used to be called.
Like Tempered Steel, is that the
Yes,
one?
tempered steel.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tempered steel on a creature, which,
Yeah.
in all honesty, I mean, there's not enough artifacts that we've seen so far that really make it feel like maybe that tempered steel part of it's gonna be good, but you never know.
Hmm.
Where like you curve out 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, and then you play Urza, and then you feel really bad because you're tapped out, and now your opponent has like 12 power on board or something silly. Like,
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and I think that's the key. Are there enough small artifact creatures? Like, is artifact creature aggro going to be viable? There are a couple of cards that I think s- might say yes, actually. Like we have the Ironwork Apprentice, the little 0/0 that comes into play with a counter on it. It's not bad. If you have ways to give it additional counters, it has like modular-esque, a modular type ability where the counters can move when it dies. So that's nice. But then there's also Patchwork Automaton, which is quietly pretty freaking good. So I could absolutely imagine a deck that has a bunch of cheap artifact creatures, or maybe ways to generate artifact creature tokens. Even things like ornithopters, like if Urza can get online, could become very powerful. So I'm hopeful that that kind of a thing could exist, but I think it depends. Astronaut's Harvester is actually another great, a good potential 2 drop for that deck, depending on what other options there are. So I don't know. I want to believe, but I don't think Urza Prince of Krug is enough of a payoff to merit that deck's, merit building that deck.
yeah, it's not
Like
a
if
card that like it is
yeah.
worth you playing some super janky stuff over. Where like,
Hmm.
yeah, like you Ornithopter you bring up is like the perfect example because yeah, Ornithopter is good, but it still only ends up being like a 2/4, right? Like what
Hmm.
makes Ornithopter powerful is when you put scissors on it, right?
Yes.
Whatever and sorry, I can't remember the name of the enchantment
Like
right now,
yeah,
but
and Soul Artifact or
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Insult Artifact. So like you play your Ornithopter on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you make it a 5/5 flyer. Like I think stuff like that is what really pushes janky cards, quote
Hmm.
unquote, like Ornithopter, that you're just hoping synergizes enough with your deck. But Urza costs 4 mana,
Hmm.
and on top of that, like a card like Ornithopter specifically, like isn't getting enough of a boost. Maybe like a Ginger Brute's good.
There you go. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but in Explorer, I don't know if you're going to be wanting to play Urza anyways. I mean, it's a 4 mana card. Like a lot of the time, your 4 drops are going to be cards that end the game or give you so much
Hmm.
ridiculous value up front that they do pretty much end the game. They come down even if your opponent kills them. But Urza Prince of Krug is not that card. It's more just like it's a lord with upside. It's kind of like
Yeah.
where lords have to be in 2022 Magic. They have to give like +2/+2, or they have to be like 2 mana 1/1s that give +1/+1, which we saw in Dominaria United.
Hmm.
And I think even Urza giving +2/+2 isn't enough to push it into playability. I could be wrong, especially if there's like a token type deck that makes a lot of artifact creatures, but
Yeah, I think
um, I don't
yeah.
know.
I completely, to be honest, I completely agree. This card looks like it is decent, but it doesn't have a home. And it's important to keep in mind it's a role player within that deck. This is not your
Mm-hmm.
finisher. This is not the key build around. If there is something that can produce, you know, multiple tokens a turn that all happen to be artifact creatures, then all of a sudden this guy gets much better. If we have something like that in the format, then we're talking. Um, yeah, but I don't know. Like that style of deck has to be okay without Urza in order to be even remotely playable with him, if that makes sense.
I think it's really
Yeah.
good with the creature land because the creature land you can activate for 2 mana. The
Oh, true.
Mishra's
Yep.
factory. I'm so
Is it Mishra's
sorry.
Factory? No worries.
Foundry. Mishra's Foundry.
Boundary. Yes.
So for 2 mana you can make that a 2/2, and then it'll be a 4/4 with Urza. But I also don't. I don't think Urza's enough to really build around. That's the thing. Like, what I'm even
Yeah.
talking about isn't even that crazy because then you're just playing like a 4 mana 2/3 to make one of your creature lands. Like, you're paying
Yeah.
6 mana
No.
to get a 4/4. Like, that's not like
Well,
impressive.
and that seems to be the story of like all the brothers that we've seen so far. They seem to be okay in the right kind of deck. And I feel like the Urza cards tend to ask more of you than the Mishra cards. That's been my experience.
Yeah, a
Like if you
little
look at
bit.
their mythics with the Melds, it's like Urza, you got to jump through all these hoops, but you get like one of the strongest planeswalkers to ever be printed as the payoff. So like, okay, that's great, but like you have to jump through all these hoops. Meanwhile, Mishra's like, you need to attack on turn 4. Like, okay. Like I was gonna do that anyway, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get a 9/9 with like 3 crazy ETB triggers. Like what? So I mean, it's gonna
Yeah,
get blown out to Wandering Emperor, but still totally worth it. Yeah,
definitely some like power disparity between the brothers. I mean,
I
they're
think so.
obviously being like, look, Mishra's got more power now than
Yeah,
before.
Mishra's definitely looking pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, this card specifically, not really much else to touch on. It's like
yeah,
fine.
it's fine.
Um, our next card is an interesting one. There's it's like one of these cards that you have to read like 3 or 4 times because it's not like, and it's not even like anything crazy, but it's just the way it's worded. So,
Hmm.
Hercule, Master Wizard. Finally, we get a Hercule card. Colorless, double blue for a 2/4 human wizard advisor legendary creature. At the beginning of your end step, if you cast a non-creature spell this turn, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. For each card type among non-creature spells you've cast this turn, you can put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in 80 order. Okay, so to clarify what this card does. So let's say you cast an instant, a sorcerer, and a planeswalker in your main phase. At the beginning of your end step, you'll look at the top 5, and you can put an instant, sorcery, and planeswalker into your hand. So for each non-creature card you've cast, at the beginning of your end step specifically. So what I find a little bit weird about this card is it's not every end step, so it's not good
Hmm.
with counter spells, right? Like
Yes.
you have to be countering stuff on your turn. So you kind of have to be tapping out for I don't like you have to be tapping out for specific things, and for you to be tapping out for like some planeswalkers and stuff, like maybe yeah, obviously in the right shell that's great, but at the same time, like I just don't see like this card's good in EDH, but I don't really see it in
Hmm.
competitive Magic, right?
Yeah, I think you're on something there. That's definitely one of the big weaknesses of the card because if you're running blue in a competitive format, a lot of the time you want to run some counter spells and you want to be able to pull those counters, like you want to be able to draw them at key moments, and that is going to be difficult with Hercule. So you definitely would want to be running things that are like planeswalkers. You could do good things with planeswalkers. You've got sorceries, obviously various and sundry sorceries are on the table. Enchantments are also available, so and non-creature artifacts. So there is definitely a place for Hercule. I think there is something. But I mean, being able to hit like, but even that, like, I don't know. Yeah, because you do have to tap out main phase a lot of the time. So I would consider Hercule like really awesome in like Fires of Invention decks
Yeah, like
where
I think artifact
you're
based
not
decks
casting instant
too,
speed
right?
anyway. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing where I would want to where I'd want to play him.
Like artifact enchantment based strategies
Hmm.
where your whole deck is just all those cards.
Yeah.
So the whole time you're just feeling you know that you're gonna hit more of those cards because you're digging deep enough to get like just one of them or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think even if you're getting at least one card every single turn off of this card, you're getting some value. I just don't know what deck wants this. I think that's where like the EDH part of me looks at it and I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, maybe like an actually dedicated deck to specific types of cards
Yeah.
is better for this because you're actually gonna hit maximum value of knowing that every 5 cards you're getting that non-creature card. Whereas, yeah, if you play an instant sorcery and a planeswalker, then say go, and then you get look at your top 5. I mean, the odds of you hitting literally each individual one of those is
Not
gonna
great.
be
Yeah.
really hard to plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because like, yeah, when you read this, it's easy to look. It's like, oh, if I play like 3 or 4 card types, I could draw 4 cards at my end step. It's like, yeah, but how realistic is that really? Like most of the time, this is gonna say, look at the top 5 cards with some limitations, take one of them, maybe 2 of them, and put it in your hand. Like, and that can be powerful. I mean, if you could do that consistently for multiple turns, that's gonna add up. But I don't know. There are cards that just say draw a card on them. Like, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Aether Channeler, it's a 3 drop. You play it and you draw a card. Like,
There's gonna be a card we're gonna
yeah.
talk about in a little bit that definitely says draw a card on it.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
uh, our next card here is one that I think is a card. I think this is like one of the best cards in the set, easily. Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, double black, colorless, 3/3. Legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay a life if they do draw a card. And then 4 triple black, discard X cards, exile top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So, up front, anytime your creature deals damage to your opponent, you can pay a life and draw a card, which is already obviously a powerful effect. On top of that, let's say
Hmm.
you get to 7 mana and you still somehow have cards in your hand. You can exile the top X cards of your opponent's library and then start to cast some cards for free. I think this card is absolutely absurd. I think that, man, like, does black need more cards? Like, I don't understand like why we keep printing these insanely busted cards
Yeah, I
in
mean, we're
standard that are really good for black. Like, I feel like we just banned Mihawk and then now we're just putting another card into the format that's like this
mhm.
ridiculously on rate high powered mythic that draws cards. And then if you're playing a grindy mid range deck, yeah, you probably will have some cards in your hand, especially if you
Mhm.
start to hold some lands and not all out of nowhere you're just like, let's not forget you can use this ability at instant speed. You can just do this at end step and discard 3 cards and then, kind of get your opponent for their top 3 cards, and then all of a sudden you're casting some just like really nutty cards.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, this is just straight up insane. It's, I mean, the
This card's
floor
nuts,
on
right?
this, yeah, it's absolutely nuts. The floor on this is a cheaper, significantly larger Toski in black, right? I mean, that's kind of what you have. Where if you're hitting your opponents, you're drawing cards. But even then, it's a May ability because life loss is attached to it as well. So I don't know, like that's awesome, just straight awesome. And it's a 3/3 for 3. Like, why does it have to be on rate? Like, I know Gix is a big deal. Like, I know Gix has got to be a good card, but holy crap, this thing is insane. Like,
Yeah,
how
this
many
card's
games?
nuts.
Yeah, and this is in a standard where you're gonna be able to Gix into Sheldred. And if you're wondering how many people are actually going to be doing that, all of them, all the people
Yeah,
are going to be
a
doing that
lot
at
of
some
people are going to
point.
be doing that. I
That's like, uh, it's so good. It's right there.
If they don't ban
Yeah.
Rafine, this card and Rafine are going to be like the nuts, right? Because like you're going to be just hitting your opponent for damage, drawing a bunch of cards when you even get to
Hmm.
the attack phase, and kind of just like, so the thing about cards like expressive iteration is, and we've seen a lot of these cards get banned, right? The What I find so crazy is we're like seeing these cards like not in blue. So what I'm really
Hmm.
trying to get at here, I know my thought process kind of starts to jump in a bunch of different directions, but what I'm really trying to get at here is that the more cards that you see, the better chance you have at winning the game of Magic, because you're
Hmm.
getting the to hit the cards that you need in that matchup that you're in. So cards like this and cards like Rafine essentially dig deeper into your deck, ensuring that you're going to hit the cards that you need. On top of that, this is a card that just immediately snowballs because you're already playing it on 3. And you're right, you're going to go Shieldred, and then, wow, if you hit Invoke on 5, was your opponent ever in the game at all? You know, like,
Not really,
probably
no.
not. Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
drawing, like, you just drew, like, 4 or 5 cards in, like, a 2 or 3 turn span, like, so now you
Yeah,
have all
and
the removals you need. You've
yep.
reloaded your hand, and maybe you have some lands for that 7 mana ability on Gix. I think that we're going to see that 7 mana ability come up a lot more than people think, because you and me both know, from the tournaments that we host, sometimes some games just come to top decks. And what
Mhm.
better way than
Totally.
just, like, you save up a few of your lands, get the 7 mana, and then rip it at end step, and then just exile all your opponent's cards, and then now you're starting to cast, 4 or 5 cards for free, and your opponent just outright loses the game. I mean, this
Yeah.
card's good early. This card's good later. Another card that just scales. Like, yeah, cards that do multiple things have multiple paragraphs. Like, this card's nuts.
Yeah.
I think this card's up there for best card in the set, in my opinion, already. Um, this and I think one other card kind of competes for it, that we'll
Mhm.
talk about here in a little bit. But I think Gix is,
That actually could synergize nicely together now that I think about it. But yes.
yeah, yeah. Even both of those cards too could
Yeah.
probably be really good.
Yeah. No, and the thing is, this is normally the point where like, okay, granted, we generally agree on a lot of the on a lot of our uh reads, but like, I want to offer some kind of counter, and I just can't. Like, I don't know that I'm willing to say that this is the most powerful card we've seen so far. Like, one of the most powerful cards we've seen. Well, one of definitely. Like, one of the most powerful cards for sure. Is it going to be the most impactful? I don't know, but like,
It's up there.
I wouldn't be
I
surprised,
think it's
man.
up there. Like,
Like, yeah,
I
I
think
think
it's
you're
going to get
right.
played in a
It's
lot of different formats. I expect this card
hmm
to make Explorer, Suicide Black decks a lot better.
Oh yeah.
I don't know about the power level Pioneer, but I mean, I think this card is going to get played a lot of different formats on Arena,
Mhm.
and I expect it to be a card everybody hates. Like, out of the
That's fair.
gate, I expect this to be a card everybody hates, because you're going to be taking like they're going to play Underdog on the
Mhm.
play. You're going to play your tap land on 2, and then they play Gix, and then the game literally, it's just like Rafine. This was my thing about Rafine, in all honesty, was like, oh, I just play this card and I hit you and I draw cards and I win. The game ends. This is a 3-drop
Mhm.
that ends the game as soon as you hit them with the Underdog, because you hit them for damage, you drew a card, and then now you have
Mhm.
2 cards that your opponent has to kill. One of them doesn't just die to cut down either, right? Like
Mhm.
Gix, you need like a hard removal spell for nowadays, or like, like a lightning strike, something like that. But yeah, I think this card's nuts. I legitimately think this is one of the cards in the set that, this is like the Fable, this is the Hook, this is the
Mhm.
Rafine, this is that card in this set, and I expect this card to just be nuts. I mean, you can play it in all kinds of decks. The only downside to the card, in all honesty, if we're gonna have a counterpoint, is it doesn't have an ability. It doesn't have Menace. It doesn't have Death Touch.
Mhm. No ward
Um,
or anything like that. Yeah.
yeah, no ward, no protection, no menace. Yeah, no menace,
Mhm.
nothing like that. No lifelink. Um, I mean, other
Oh
than
my goodness,
that,
can you imagine if this had lifelink? Holy
oh
cow.
my god, that would be really messed up. Yeah, I think this card's nuts. Expect to see this
Yeah.
card. Expect to lose to it. You're gonna be really upset when you see this on the draw.
Mhm.
Card is absolutely nuts. Our next card is quite a bit of a tone down from the card we just talked about, but it's the other brother in the war. We already talked a little bit about Urza. We got Mishra, Tamer of Makfawa. I'm not sure if I said that right, but whatever. 3 colorless black and a red for a 4/4 human artificer. Permanents you control have ward, sack a permanent, and then each artifact card in your graveyard has unearth for a colorless black and red, so you can start to reanimate all your artifacts, for a turn with unearth. And the most important part of this card is permanents you control have ward, and then they have to sacrifice a permanent. Listen, back in 2008 Magic, you would be like, I just sack a land, doesn't matter. 2022 Magic, you sacking a land probably means you lose the game. So you have to actually
Mhm.
have an impactful permanent to be able to sacrifice just to target any of the permanents that your opponent has. I actually think that this card has legs somewhere. I don't
Mhm.
know how many of them you would play in a deck, and I also don't know what deck it would go in, but being able to recurse things and protecting your cards, I think both of those abilities are actually pretty powerful. And it's a 4/4, so it's not an easy card to kill on mana cost. It costs 5, and power toughness 4/4. I mean, what do you think, Ham? I think this card is like decent, right?
Yeah, I think it's solid. I think the ward is a big deal. Being able to give your entire squad, absolutely everything you have, protection is really meaningful. And it's going to help in like longer, more grindy games where you're trying to like really eke out card advantage, because that's one way to do that. If your opponent is trying to remove their things, you remove one of theirs. Granted, they get to pick what it is, but still, it's a card for a card. I mean, it turns every piece of spot removal your opponent has into a 2-for-1, which is just nice. Yeah, so that's great. But then on top of that, I think the second part of that is also pretty meaningful. Giving artifact cards in your graveyard unearthed is awesome. If you've played it all with Ryvaz, the Claw, it gives dragons effectively flashback, where you can actually cast them from your graveyard, but then if they die, they exile. So it's kind of like it's like a quasi disturb effect, and it's awesome. Like being able to, whenever, like if you're in arena and you've ever played with Ryvaz or Lear, where it opens up your graveyard, like it feels so good because you might be sitting there with 1 or 2 cards in your hand, like I don't know what I got. The moment you drop Mishra, all of a sudden, like your whole graveyard opens up. Like all your artifacts in your graveyard all of a sudden are now available to you. That gives you more options, more lines.
Mm-hmm.
Where I can imagine this card being effective is in sacrifice decks. And the reason I say that specifically is because when you unearth, you get that artifact for 1 turn. It has haste, so if it's a creature, you can swing with it. Otherwise, you can just activate it or get its ETBs or whatever else you got going on. But then you have this artifact just sitting here, and it just dies at the end of the turn. It goes straight to exile at the end of the turn if you don't do something with it. So being able to sacrifice it to something else, whether that's a casualty effect, whether that's a an onboard sacrifice effect like an anvil or something like that, like I think that actually could be a really powerful sequence that people can set up. Being able to get fodder for those kind of sack machines could really go a long way.
I think
And
Flesh Gorger
yeah,
is like just waiting to work with this card. Like you can
ooh,
Flesh Gorger with the Anvil because
mm-hmm,
that's an artifact card itself. Like there's, I I think Mishra is definitely we talked a little bit about this I think off the video. Is that Mishra is definitely getting the better, the more of the love here in
mm-hmm.
this set. It's pretty obvious, and you're right. I think even if you just play this as like a 1 or 2 of in like your Anvil deck, you're pretty happy because you're gonna start to get back your synthesizers. You're gonna start to get
Mm-hmm.
back. Um, I mean, the Flesh Gorger is just nuts. Like for 3 mana, you get back a 7/5 minutes lifelink, and then
Well,
up front, you already paid probably 3 mana for a 3/3 that maybe chipped away at one of your opponent's creatures or
right.
dealt your opponent some damage, and then you gained a bunch of life, and then now it gives you time to set up your little Anvil engine, and on top of that, you're probably playing Gix, and you're probably
Mm-hmm.
playing Shieldred, and you're just your deck's just broken, and your opponent
Oh yeah. No,
is like
Rakdos.
crying in a
Mm-hmm.
corner because yeah, your deck is just busted.
Yeah. No, and you mentioned the
Um,
Flesh Gorger, and Flesh Gorger, like we said, may be the best example, but they did a keyword mechanic. And that keyword mechanic is part of the reason the Flesh Gorger is just cracked with this. Because you can play it as a 3-drop, sack it to something, or have it die in combat, and then unearth it. And when you unearth it, it comes back in as a 7/5, not the 3/3. So you get the big body for the 1 turn, which is nuts. And then if it survives, which let's be honest, it probably will because it's a pretty big chunky boy. You could then, if you want to really get saucy, you could casualty Ob Nixilis with it and just insta ult one of them.
oh, I didn't even think about that.
So
That's
that's a
so
line.
messed up.
That's a line you could theoretically take. Yeah, Rakdos is good, everybody.
I mean, it
You
is the
could
holiday season, magical Christmas land, right?
totally. Oh, absolutely. No
Can't
question. No
discount you for
question.
going there, HamHocks.
Yeah, but the other part about it, the reason I mentioned like the prototype mechanic specifically is like that's busted with Flesh Gorger, yes, but we have more prototype cards coming that we haven't seen yet. It would be very possible to make a whole battle plan around this with potentially 8, 10 different prototype creatures. Flesh Gorger being one of them, probably, because I doubt they're going to be significantly better than that. Uh, but still, like that's this is all very doable, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mishra is definitely a card that I I think it's a card people are going to be sleeping on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to be surprised if I see it get played because it's in the
Yeah.
right colors that you want to be doing the type of effect that this card has. And on top of that, I mean, Ham, I really can't get over the fact that it says all your cards have Ward Sack a permanent. Like that just feels so strong. Like
Yeah.
I think that's nuts. Like imagine like you're holding the Boseiju and then
Mm-hmm.
You tap out for a turn, they play this, and then now you're like, shit. Now if I want to destroy their anvil, I have to discard this. They get a land, and then I also have to sacrifice a card. Like that's not
That's
where you want to be in life,
yeah.
right?
That went from having an awesome card in your hand to giving your opponent just like to just getting the most raw deal. Yeah,
Hmm.
really fast.
Yeah. So Mishra, we'll see where it ends up and if it ends up getting played. Now this next card, Ham. So
Mm.
we've got two back-to-back fire cards here. So the first one we're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
go over is a new one. The second one's a reprint. So the first one here we got Teferi, Temporal Pilgrim. So obviously Teferi Planeswalker, 3 colorless, double blue, 4 loyalty starting. It has a world Planeswalker ability, which is whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on this card. So you draw some cards, it gets counters. It feels pretty busted. So for
Mm-hmm.
0, aka +1, you get to draw a card. -2, you get to create a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance. It has whenever you draw a card, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so it's lower scale total with upside with an actual ability. And then -12, target opponent chooses a permanent they control, returns to their hand, then shuffles all the rest of the non-land permanents they control into their owner's library. So I'm not looking at this card for the ultimate. I'm mostly looking
Mm-hmm.
at it for the first three abilities, quote unquote, which is the just static effect of whenever you draw a card, it gets a counter. And then you can draw a card, and then it just automatically gets a counter. So for 0, aka +1, it's going to uptick. And then on top of that, the -2, I think, is kind of absurd because you can -2 it. So you can kind of like, obviously in the control, like this card is just nuts because
Yeah.
it's the consistent engine of drawing cards, and on top of that, its loyalty is gonna go up if you're playing like the X spell from, I think it was Dominaria. So on top of that, you can start down ticking it to make creatures that get like exponentially huge. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's not scoff at this. I mean, you make a 2/2 turn one, and then if you get to untap, it's already a 3/3. If you get to use the ability on the card when you draw a card, it's now going to be a 4/4. And then any additional cards that you have that draw cards randomly make those tokens even better. I actually think that this card is good in mid range and control. I think you're going to be seeing this card in the Storm the Festival decks.
Mm-hmm.
This card's going to be great there, right? Where you can use it with the other Teferi, or you can use it with like even a Spirited Companion draws you a card. There's all kinds of
Absolutely.
random things that synergize with this very well in the mid range strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And for the control strategy, obviously, yeah, you're going to be playing cards that draw you cards. I mean, most of the control decks already do that. And then what I also find fascinating about this card is it gets really good with cheap draw spells. Like this card is almost perfect for the mono blue deck because you're playing cards like Opt. You're playing
Mm-hmm.
all these small value, small ball cards that end up drawing you additional cards on the side. And I think that that's really, really phenomenal with Teferi on top of already making threats that no matter what, like is each token that you make is, as long as Teferi's on the battlefield, it gets +2/+2 every turn. Every turn it's just gonna get bigger. And before you know it, you got a 6/6/7/7, got like two or three of those out, and your opponent's just gonna lose because they can't deal with it. And I just think
Well,
this card's nuts. Like, at least
and
to me, when I
yeah.
first read it, I was like, yeah, that's nuts.
Well, and actually, the spirits, the Teferi does not need to be on the battlefield for the spirit to get the +1/+1 counter. The token it maintains that
Yep, it
ability
has
whether
the
Teferi is
ability.
there or not. So, I mean, one of the things that I hadn't really considered is if you drop Teferi, you down tick, you create one of those spirits. So Teferi's already protected itself. Granted, it goes down to 2 loyalty in the process. Doesn't feel great. Untap, Teferi upticks automatically on the turn. You go down tick again and then start casting card draw spells.
Yep.
Yeah, and like you're saying, like, yeah, you had a silver scrutiny where X equals 4 or whatever. Like, that's insane. So now all of a sudden you're sitting on 2/6/6s and a planeswalker that was almost dead a second ago that's now at 5 loyalty or whatever. Like, oh, and you just restock your hand. Let's not forget about that. Like, that kind of thing is nuts. And yeah, I think that's very, very, very powerful. That said, Teferi is a 5-drop planeswalker. There also is more removal nowadays that actually allows you to target planeswalkers directly. So we have cards like Soul Transfer, even things like Eaten Alive, which is a little more niche, but it still hits it. Fateful Absence, those kinds of things. So I think Teferi's going to eat a lot of those, but he's going to have to. Otherwise, he's going to take over the game. Yeah.
What the
I,
only
yeah,
downside to this card is Invoke Despair being in the format because obviously if that card resolves, it makes Teferi a lot worse. So
true.
Teferi ends up feeling more like a 6 to 7 drop, or maybe you want to hold up like a Spell Pierce or like a Negate.
Mm-hmm.
Any type of effect that essentially is going to negate your opponent getting rid of it. But at the same time, I think that, in my opinion, between this and Gix, I think so far the best cards in the set that we've seen so far. I think that both of them do. They draw cards. They draw cards
Yeah.
and their value engines by themselves. Like Teferi, continually, we know how good the other 5 minutes Teferi was. And that
Mm-hmm.
card protected itself by down ticking and putting a card back into your opponent's deck. This card draws cards and then down ticks and makes an actual card that can end the game in a very, very timely manner. Considering
Mm-hmm.
that you and me both know, yeah, it could be 6/6 and 8/8 in like a couple turns, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess that Teferi token is a lot better than we thought it was.
Oh yeah. Well, and the ultimate I don't think is going to come up very often in 60 card formats, but I think in Commander it absolutely will. And the ultimate being a -12, I mean with 4 starting loyalty, like it's going to take a minute to get there, but at the same time in
Scrutiny,
situations where
you can get
wheels
there.
exist and that kind of thing, like it can be done. Um but yeah, target opponent chooses a permanent they control and returns it to their hand, then shuffles each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library. So they get to keep one in their hand. The rest go into their library. It just deletes their board. Like that is nuts. And so what I fully anticipate, what I fully expect to see is people running Teferi Temporal Pilgrim in Commander alongside cards like Rhystic Study or Consecrated Sphinx that result in you just drawing an obscene number of cards just each turn cycle. And so you just put all the loyalty on Tef. And so it really forces your opponents to either target or removal him, or you just down tick and basically you target one of the players in your pod and just remove their board. Like that's insane.
You just pick
Like,
someone to be really, really, really mean
just
to, pretty
you
much.
get rid of all of that. It's insane. Like
uh,
that is incredibly powerful. I mean, it's kind of in a way it's not quite the classic Planeswalker template because the Planeswalkers used to be +1, get a little bit of value, usually worth like half a card or so. Down tick, remove a thing, ultimate you win the game. Like that's the classic mode. This doesn't have the down tick removal mode, but it has a +1 draw card effectively. I mean, it's 0, but come on.
yeah, I think the ultimate's pretty
So,
decent. It has like a farewell type feel, where
mhm,
you're gonna be able to get rid of all the tokens on the battlefield. You know, these random blood tokens, maybe like some clue tokens that you've given them, or maybe some clue tokens they made, and then yeah, they get to return something back to their hand. But at that point, you're only really dealing with that one thing, maybe, or a couple
mhm,
things. Like, I think Teferi is gonna be great in mid range and control, and yeah, I just expect this card to kind of. I don't know if it's gonna take people like a minute to kind of get used to it and maybe figure out what deck it goes in, but I expect
mhm.
this card to kind of be everywhere eventually, and
Yeah.
yeah, it gets really good with a lot of like draw effects and yeah, I mean Bank Buster and I don't know. There's so many things going on. I mean, what's really nuts is with Rafine once again.
Right.
You just you have Rafine out and then you attack with the token itself, and it automatically is going to get bigger because you're going to connive at least one, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, this card has a lot of power, and I expect to see
Oh
it get
yeah.
played. Honestly,
Yeah. And it also just I mean, it fits even on curve alongside Gix and Shieldred. So in a Demir deck, like that's a thing you could do. Just throwing that out there, which is kind of bonkers. Although that said, saying that a card combos with what is possibly the strongest card in the entire format right now is kind of silly, but here we are.
definitely. So Teferi, another card that we expect to definitely get played. Specifically, I'm talking about like in standard and other formats.
Hmm.
It's kind of harder to gauge because there's some cards that we don't necessarily think that are probably strong enough, but end up being powerful. Like Asika's Chariot, it's in my opinion is the best example where
Hmm.
Asika's
Hmm.
Chariot up front is a card that we're like, yeah, it's just a standard card, but then Greasefang will play it,
Hmm.
and it's because yeah, even you getting some value one turn early or even later in the game, like we've seen in the tournaments where. Yeah, I mean, you
Hmm.
just play this artifact that gets a couple creatures on the battlefield, and then if you don't deal with it, you kind of just lose to it anyways. So, I think that cards like Teferi are a great example of like another card that snowballs out of control, and we're not gonna say, oh, this card automatically goes in blue white control. or anything like that, or spirits maybe even. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a card to definitely watch out for. That I wouldn't be surprised to see this get played in Explorer.
Yeah. Oh, I'm right there with you.
Speaking of Explorer, we actually
Yeah.
our next card is actually one that's definitely going to get played in Explorer. We have Monastery Swiftspear. That's right. It's getting reprinted into Standard. What a time to be alive, HamHocks. Like, I just want
Dude.
Tarmogoyf. Can we just get Tarmogoyf in Standard already? Can we
I
just
mean,
reprint it and make it like
it,
$5 for everyone to enjoy again?
I'm on board. I think that's a great idea. I mean, we have Monastery Swiftspear, we have Liliana the Veil, we have Impulse even is now in the format. I mean,
Yeah.
let's go. Yeah. Yeah, make standard modern again. No,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, pretty much. Um,
Like, I'm here for it. Let's go.
so Monastery Swiftspear, 1 red for a 1/2 with haste, has prowess whenever you cast a non-creature spell. It gets +1/+1 until on a turn. That's it. That's the text. That's
Love
it.
it.
That's it. It doesn't have like, oh, if this card does a cartwheel, then you get to do a hula hoop, and then you get a treasure token. It doesn't do any of that nonsense. It's just a straightforward 1 mana 1/2 with haste and prowess. This card is actually going to be really impactful, I think, in standard and in Explorer for sure. It's going to be in the burn
Hmm.
decks. It's going to be maybe in some Atarka decks, and the heroic deck's definitely going to love it. In standard, it's just a card that kind of helps fill the curve out for mono red decks.
Oh yeah.
There's one of the next cards we'll talk about here as well is going to help with that, but I think Swiftspear with Kumano makes like some really really strong 1 drops, and I think that that's
Hmm.
something that red itself has been lacking for a little bit in the last 2 to 3 sets outside of Kumano's from Neon Dynasty. A true red deck, I personally base it off of its 1 drops.
Yeah.
And, you want to start the game early and often. And I think Swiftspear definitely does that. The more non creature spells you have in your deck, the better. And, I mean, yeah, it's just a good card already. It has haste. It's better in multiples. I think it's a solid card. And, yeah, I expect to see it get played in Standard and Explorer.
Yeah.
Historic, all Alchemy. Every format this card is going to get played somewhere, especially with Illuminator Virtuoso, I think is what it's called.
Mm, yep.
You can play Swiftspear into that, and then now you have 2 threats that your opponents have to deal with. This card really helps a lot of strategies that want it. Like,
Oh
there's a
yeah.
lot of strategies that really want this card, and its existence in Standard is going to help a lot of these decks out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you could run, yeah, like Boros Spellslinger with, which I mean, I know we're seeing in Pioneer, but yeah, even a variant in Standard with Illuminated Virtuoso, that's a great shout because there is like Ancestral Anger, you have Homestead Courage, those kinds of like 1 drop effects that target the Virtuoso. Great. That would also buff up the Swift Spear with the prowess. That's awesome. You also have like, is it Delver Shells with like cantrips and things like that we were talking about with like maybe Haughty Djinn or electrostatic infantry. Maybe Swift Spear slots in as an early threat in that deck too, because it gives your opponent like one of the main benefits of you running a good 1 drop in those kinds of decks is not that the monetary Swift Spear is going to end the game for you. I mean, it could in a pinch, but the main benefit is your opponent uses their creature removal on it because it's providing early pressure. And so by the time your Haughty Djinn hits or your Delver flips, they don't have it in their hand anymore. Like
Yeah, your
that's
evasive threat's
the,
actually able to get
mhm.
there, right?
Yeah, that's big time. Like and I've actually run like there are a number of creatures that I've run over time. Where even if people ask like, why do you have that in there? It's like, oh, because it's a 1 or 2 drop that's super threatening, and my opponent will burn removal on it. Like Magda, Brazen Borrower took a lot of hits for the team. Because the moment she hits the field, everybody assumes like, oh, she must be critical to the plan, she's got to die, and it's like, well, no, not really, but she's like, she could ramp me a little, I guess, but like, no, her main goal is to get that Infernal Grasp out of your hand. And Monastery Swiftspear could fill that role in a lot of games, and that's fine. Yeah.
What I really like about it is it's weak to cut down, but then there's also games where you can get it out of cut down range.
Yes, if you have open
And
mana. Yep.
yeah, like even just a couple 1 drops make this card get out of cut down range, and then before you know it, you're taking like 4 or 5 off of just the 1 drop. And yeah, this card is just a classic. We've seen it
Hmm.
for the last few years. A lot of people who are newer to Magic probably have never seen it and now get to experience the true power of it and why it's actually such a versatile card in a lot of different formats and a lot of different decks. So Spirit definitely a happy inclusion. Like you said, we're bringing back so many cards that are nostalgic, and it's really cool to see one that we've kind of been wanting.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of been hungry for like, yeah, we didn't get it in the anthology, but you're right. Like we got it in this set, and I think that that's what's important. Is either
Yeah.
way it being included onto Arena in order to be played in the formats that
Mm-hmm.
really want it to be played in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a critical card in Pioneer. So when the Explorer Anthology rolled around, we all kind of assumed it would be there, and it wasn't. And apparently, this is why. Which I'm okay with this. Yeah.
Hmm. Our next card here is another reprint as well. Interesting one that I wouldn't have expected. So we have Blast Zone. Enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. It taps for a colorless, so it comes in untapped. Comes in with the counter, and then double X tap. Put X counters on this card. Or 3 tap sack it. Destroy each non-land permanent mana value equal number of charge counters on it. This card is really good in mid-range to control strategies, where in control strategies you can maybe play one and know that it's going to be able to get rid of some random 1-drops, or maybe you kind of just load up on some counters on it. If your opponent has like a couple 3-drops, you can blow those up. I think this card could potentially get played in like the mono black decks because it's just another utility land that kind of gives you some late game range. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a good card to have in standard. It's not like anything crazy, you know?
Right. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Like it's a decent card. It's a good utility land. I think I think the gimmick or the joke of it being included in this set is Power Stones because it has a big mana sink that's on an ability. It kind of fits because we see that with a lot of other cards. So they'll have like 6 or 8 cost activations, but there are theoretically going to be a bunch of power stones lying around that can help you get to those activation costs. And Blast Zone is kind of like that. Like usually when Blast Zone, first showed up back in, I believe it was War of the Spark, you have like it enters with 1 counter, so you could immediately just kill 1-drops. Okay, fine. Like that's not bad. You still have to spend a lot of mana just to do that. But if you do want to add more counters to it later, that can end up. I mean, you could pump a lot of mana into this thing throughout the course of the game without trying too hard. If you're trying to remove like 4 or 5 drops from your opponent, like it adds up really fast.
It's a really good card that your opponent has to play against. Like I played this
Mm-hmm.
card a ton in Modern, in Eldrazi decks and Tron decks.
Okay.
Obviously those decks have more mana at their disposal, but at the same time, like I always like this card because it's kind of like a catch-all for permanents like Blood Moon or other problematic cards that give you trouble,
Mm,
like Void Mirror and things like that. But like overall, you're right. It's a great card that if it's just laying around, and you can just put a couple counters here, a couple counters there, and what's really important about this card is that it's an uncounterable ability. Unless they have like
yes.
a counter target, activated trigger ability, whatever, which could happen with Urtai. But essentially, it's an ability that's really good against like control decks with planeswalkers, because those decks don't have a way to deal with this land. So you're right. You just play Blast Zone, all of a sudden you put 4 counters on it, and then now you can finally blow up the Teferi and
Mm-hmm.
get rid of it. Even though maybe the tokens might be there and beat you down, but a
Right.
creature is easier to deal with than a 5 mana planeswalker that's continually drawing cards. So I think Blast
Right.
Zone's an important card to have in a standard format, and it's a card that we already existed in some of these older formats, so it's not really getting played already, unless you're playing like some big Ugin mana deck or something like that. But
Right.
um, I think it's a card in standard that you're going to see sparingly, and when you do see it sparingly, it's going to feel like a really good card when it's really good. And then other than that, it's probably going to be barely noticeable. It could
Yeah.
end up hurting your mana because in the 3 color
Mm-hmm.
decks you're not really able to play it. So
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There are going to be like 2 or 3 games in a session where you're like, why is this in here? It doesn't help my colors. What am I doing? But you're going to have that one game where your opponent has a wedding announcement, a Rafine, and a Gix online, and you can rib it for
yeah,
3,
River for
and
3,
it's going to
man.
feel like $1,000,000,
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a weird board wipe that can catch a
Yeah.
lot of unsuspecting opponents and unsuspecting players, and at the same time, it's just like I said, it's a card that I really like. I like answers
Hmm.
being in standard. I like
Yeah.
there being the ability to be able to deal with all kinds of cards at all times. And Blast Zone's a card that came out originally in War of the Spark when cards were really doing a lot of effects. And this card's another great example of as the game progressive, this card scales. And it's a card that you're not really losing any value outside of maybe it not tapping for a color of mana that you need, which, yeah, that could be relevant if you're trying to cash your cards on time. But
Hmm.
there's other cards and other lands that let you do that. So just having like 1 or 2 Blaststone in like your 2 or mono color deck, I think it's gonna help you in the long run, and you're gonna start to realize that the more that you actually play this card.
Yeah. Definitely agree.
So our next card here we have Felden Ronum Excavator. So another aggressive red card, colorless and a red for a 2/2 with haste. It can't block. Whenever it's dealt damage, you exile that many cards from the top of your library. You get to choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you can play that card. So on rate, obviously 2 mana 2/2 haste, pretty good. The fact that it can't block is a little bit of a detriment to the card, but it makes up for it in that you can kind of just suicide it out. It might take a lot of damage, and then you'll get to choose a card that you get to play until your next turn. So that clause until your next turn is obviously very, very relevant. And overall, just a really solid card. I know you talked about it with Kumanos, or you can play Kumanos, and
Hmm.
it comes down as a 3/3, kind of like a Robber the Rich type of a feel to it. I think this card's great, right? Like it really helps the
Oh,
red
totally.
decks.
Yeah, no, hyper red aggressive decks. They need, we saw a 1/2 haster for one. We have a 2/2 haster for two, and then you have Reckless Stormseeker or Squee at three. So all of a sudden, the red deck went from being like okay, like there's a decent red deck right now on the ladder that's running like Phoenix Chick and like Rada's Firebrand, which is fine, but at the end of the day, I think Felden is just so much better at that two drop slot. Like, it's not even funny. You can make an argument that Reinforced Ronin or Phoenix Chick is like still okay in the one drop slot as compared to Swiftspear, depending on how many burn spells you're running. But I think Felden to the two drop slot is a no brainer. Like, it just slots right in.
Yeah, it's really good in
Because
like not
yeah,
even just mono red. Like it's really good in like the red green decks. Like
mm,
it's a card that you don't mind putting more counters on because you know that
true.
it'll be able to take a lot more damage and you're gonna get to see that much deeper into your deck. And I mean, who knows? Maybe you just ping it with like some of your one damage spells if you happen to have some in
Hmm.
your deck and just get some extra value off of it. I think this card we're gonna see a good amount of. It's one of those cards that really does remind me of Robert the Rich, where sometimes it's better on the play and sometimes it's better on the draw.
Hmm.
Um, but overall, I mean, it's a really good card. Obviously, the biggest downside of the card is that it's legendary, so you can't just
Yeah.
get two of them down
Hmm.
and start to go off. But I think it's a really solid card on rate, and on top of that, it gives you the ability to dig into your deck and get cards to continually keep playing.
Yeah. And I mean, worst case, if your opponent doesn't want to block it to give you to give you that card, you're just hitting them for at least two damage every turn. That's what you want to be doing anyway. So
Yep.
yeah.
Our next card here is an interesting one. What we're seeing a theme of cards are good early and cards are good later. So we're turning into, like we talked about, 2022 Magic, where your cards got to draw a card when it comes into play. Oh, and it's gonna do something later. And this set feels like a lot of cards do something later. So we have In the Trenches, 2 white and a colorless for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and then for 5 and a white, you can exile a non-land permanent you don't control until this card leaves the battlefield. You can activate it only as a sorcery and only once. So that's once for the rest of the game forever,
Mm-hmm.
as they say, um, with our old meme of Sandlot. But
Yes.
um, I talked about earlier, like cards are mythic. This actually is a mythic rarity card.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really feel mythic, but I know that it's a card that's just gonna sit there and not do anything, and then before you know it, you're like, oh crap. It's a card that screams inevitability. It
Yeah.
sits on the battlefield, and then like you can play around it as much as you want, but then you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
lose to the cards that your opponent's playing. And then
Right.
if you deal with that, then you just lose to this card because they just end up exiling your card for 6 mana anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think it's a really powerful card. It's useful.
Yeah.
Good early,
Yeah.
good
It
late.
it reads well. I feel like it could have been a rare. Like the 6 mana is a lot.
Hmm.
So I mean, you have to invest 9 mana to remove a thing, and otherwise you just have a glorious anthem. So like, I'm not sure what decks want this. It certainly doesn't replace Wedding Announcement, which
Yeah,
is kind of
definitely
the
not.
current anthem. So it's kind of like competing for that same slot, and I don't think that's even close. Like Wedding Announcement still just absolutely pantses this thing. Um, so you need to want redundancy with that style of effect. Now, anthem effects are strong to be sure if you're going wide, but we also have, I mean, there are creatures that have anthems on them too. Like they're the the lord effects, the creature type lords, but you also have like King Darien, who gives all your creatures +1/+1 just cause, you know. So I don't know how much redundancy you actually want with this. And then if you do want that exile effect, I would rather just run like a Leyline Binding if I'm in like a 3 or 4 color deck, or I'd rather have even Prayer of Binding at 4 mana. You gain a little life, but you can do it at flash speed. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty sweet, you know? Or just go to Borrow Time, which, 3 mana to do the thing. So costs a third of what you would invest into this, but you don't get the anthem. So I don't know. Like it's a strictly better glorious anthem, but I still don't know if it's playable, you know?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think this is one of those cards that where it's going to be better when Wedding Announcement isn't in the format.
Mm-hmm.
So rotation down the line, obviously, like next year, we're talking about specifically. I think like when you see like that happen, and you see a lot of these other sets kind of go. Um, I mean, there could be a time where maybe this gets played, but other than that, I just don't. I don't think it's good enough.
Yeah.
I think that it's just okay.
Yeah.
I think that yeah, later, maybe in like a year's time, I think that you could actually see this card have an impact, but I think you're right up front. It's literally a 3 mana do nothing.
Yeah. That feels
Unless
really
you have
bad.
like a board state. Yeah, and then
Mhm.
you get like you said, it's 9 mana's worth of investment for a card that it's a weird card because it's doing two things that are like opposite. Like it wants you to be aggressive, but then it also wants you to spend 6 mana. Like what aggressive deck just has 6 mana laying around? I mean, you're like putting
Yeah.
yourself in a scenario where like you're getting into like these niche scenarios where you're like, oh, I just hope that they have one blocker, and then I just hit my 6th land, and then I finally got to activate it, and I won the game. And it's like, well, any removal
Mhm.
spell would have just done that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting card. It's another card that
Yeah,
scales, like I said. So I mean, it has potential to get played. I just don't know if it's going to get played right now. Like I said,
sure.
it's a mythic, so
That said, in draft, I don't know what
mythics
the
being
rest of this
around are
draft
really good.
yeah, I don't know what the rest of this draft environment is gonna look like, but this card kinda in a vacuum, this looks like it would be Pack 1 pickable, you know? Um, just
Yeah, definitely.
because, I mean, anthems are strong when at the end of the day, whoever has the biggest creature tends to win. Well, make all my creatures bigger. Let's go.
Yep.
Um, and then like in draft, you're more likely to have mana lying around. So having a mana sink like this that you can just use to just eat your opponent's biggest thing. All right, like in a draft environment, I'm cool with something like this. But even that, it's a mythic. So how often are you gonna actually see it in draft? Like it's
Yeah, that's a
I
really
don't
good
know.
point too. Yeah, you're not really going to see it like that often out of packs unless
Yeah.
someone gets like a double or something out of like a
Hmm.
pack. Yeah, interesting card. Not sure if it's actually going to get
Yeah.
played now or like we're talking about in like a year down the line. We're gonna have to pay attention and see where it's at.
Maybe.
Um,
Yeah, it could surprise us then. But yeah.
our next cards here that we have is gonna be like a cycle. Um, so we actually end up having commands named specific specific characters in the game, and right now I think that we only have four of them. Right, we're missing the green one. I think.
Yeah, we haven't seen the green one
Yeah,
yet,
we
which
haven't seen the
is
green one.
likely to be Titania's command or whatever. But like,
Right.
I would guess, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one that we have is the white one. So you have Kayla's command, colorless double white sorcery. You get to choose two. So each one of these you get to choose two, which I actually find very, very powerful. So the first ability on this, you get to create a 2/2 colorless artifact creature token. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature control. It gains double strike until end of turn. Search your library for a basic plains card and reveal it. So not just a basic, excuse me, basic. Yeah, it is just a basic. Sorry, a
Hmm.
basic plains card. Reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle, and then you get to gain two and scry two. So, uh, how do we feel about this command? Like, obviously, up front, it's a sorcery. It's 3 mana. It's not doing anything crazy powerful.
Hmm.
Um, eh, I don't know how I feel about this one. I think that this might end up being one of the weaker ones, even though it's a cheaper one. My main
Yeah.
concern with this card is it's not an instant. If it was an instant, yeah, it's probably really, really good because, yeah,
Hmm.
making a creature at instant speed, pumping something up with a counter, things like that are all really, really powerful effects. Um, I don't know. How do we. Is this card good enough, Ham? Like,
Yeah.
we see a lot of these commands and we see a lot of these charms. Essentially, is what these end up being, right? Since original Magic, we've had charms that have two effects, multiple effects. You get to choose one. These are like choose two. I just don't
Mhm.
think two of these effects are really that powerful, even at 3 mana.
Yeah, if it was an instant, it'd be awesome because then on its own, you could produce, 2/2 colors construct, put a counter on it, and give it double strikes. All of a sudden, you could go from having an empty board to having a 3/3 double striker online. That would have been awesome. Unfortunately, with it being at sorcery speed, you're right. That's not an option. And so I feel like the floor on this card is pretty darn low.
Yeah.
Like creating a 2/2, gaining 2 life, and scrying 2, like that's, or just going to grab a basic planes and just put it in your hand. Like, I don't know. I'm not right now with the power level where things are. Spending 3 mana even to get two of these, like these particular effects don't seem that powerful. If I can consistently have a good attack on the turn I play this and gives one of my attackers double strike, especially an attacker that maybe has trample or is evasive in some way.
Ao.
Yeah, turning AO into a 6/5 double striker, that could be something. Yeah. So I feel like if you can get value out of that mode, this might be worth it. But outside of that, I'm not sold on this one. Yeah.
Like, such a weird card. Like, it's not aggressive enough. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's trying to be aggressive enough, but it's also like a 3 mana sorcery. And then it's kind of like a weird control card if you really want to play it like that, because you're better off playing blue cards. Like,
Right.
yeah, you get to search your library for planes and then scry two and gain two, but like, I don't know. If I'm playing like Teferi, I actually want to draw cards instead.
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like it's just
Yeah.
not doing enough for being like a sorcery. Like, when we think about tap out sorceries, like,
Mm-hmm.
we want it to be a big effect, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's putting a land into play tapped. I think is almost better than most of the modes on this card, frankly, right? Like
Yeah.
that one
Unfortunately.
saga that's green that puts a land in play, makes a 1/1, and then gives a creature plus X plus
Y-
X or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's Weather Sea Treaty, I want to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even that I feel like has more value than this command. Like, I don't think this card's doing enough.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree.
It would have been really good if maybe the construct was would have been that bad if you just make it 4/4 for 3 mana. Like, let's say you made a 3/3 construct and then you're like, I put a counter on it, it's a 4/4. I mean, I feel like that's probably not really even that bad.
No, I
That would
think
have been
that's
like the
fine.
floor on it, and I
Yeah.
think that still would have been okay. But I think the fact that, I mean, I could be wrong because of Luminarch Aspirant. And what I mean by that is
Mm.
this card gets to make a 2/2, and if you do have a body on the battlefield, you give it +1/+1 and double strike. So you could potentially hit your opponent for like 6 to 8 damage or something on turn 3, and you get another body on the battlefield. So, and then the
Yeah.
next turn, maybe you make another 2/2 and then put another counter on something and then give that double strike. Like, maybe it's not as bad as we think it is, but at the same time, maybe it's just too situational.
I think you're exactly right. I think the situations where you get meaningful value are narrow, and that's the issue. I think that's exactly it. Yeah.
Because
Well,
it
and
it seems
yeah,
powerful. You're doing multiple things, right? I don't know.
yeah, true. Well, and I just look at it. A card that reminds me a lot of is Sunset Revelry. It gives it where for 1 and a white, you either get 2/1/1 bodies if your opponent has more creatures than you, or you gain 2 life if your opponent has more life than you, and you draw a card if your opponent has more cards than you. So you don't have the flexibility that this gives you, and there's no aggressive mode to it. But like that could just draw you a card or just give you some bodies, and it
Hmm.
usually fires with whichever one you need is what you get. And you could get all three of them. So, and that only costs two. So I don't know. Like it kind of gives me those vibes, but the second mode listed there definitely wants to fit into a more aggressive strategy. So I don't know. There are going to be days when somebody plays this targeting Rafine on turn 4, giving her double strike,
You're
and I'm
killing
just
me
gonna
right
cry.
now. You're just killing me
And
right
they
now.
connive with and discard 3 non-land cards, and it's just it just is an absolute blast. Like that's gonna happen. Like that kind of thing is gonna happen. But outside of those situations, like if you can get a super hyper aggressive attack on turn 3 or 4, and you can add double strike to the mix, yeah, you're gonna be in good shape there. But outside of that, I'm not sold on this thing.
Yeah, it's just a weird rare. I don't know. This
Hmm.
card really almost feels like an uncommon.
Yeah, I'm kind of agree.
It's like in regards to the other ones. I mean, there's another one here we're going to talk about in a little bit that I'm not a fan of either. But I don't know. This card just it really kills it. It's a sorcery, and then
Hmm.
I don't know if like the stats on the abilities are good enough either. Like I don't know. It's just it's almost too expensive for an aggressive deck, and then it's almost like do nothing for the mid range.
Hmm.
So I don't know. We'll see. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. Our next card here we have the red command, Mishra's command. X and red sorcery. Choose two. Choose target player. They may discard up to X cards, then draw a card for each card discarded this way. This spell deals X damage to a creature, X damage to a planeswalker, and then target creature gets plus X plus O and gains haste until end of turn. So you can choose two of those abilities. Um, man, they're really going backhand with like 1995 Magic with this one. A sorcery card that pumps the face.
Yep.
Man, haven't seen those for like 20 years, right?
It's up there,
Um,
man. Well, I'm trying to think. There was in Theros,
there might have been a
there was
card like that.
Perforos's Intervention. That was a sorcery that was X red that would create an X1 elemental creature token with trample and haste, like a ball lightning style effect.
Okay.
Like this kind of reminded me of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like
Except you have
that.
to have a body online already to buff.
Yeah, this one
Yeah.
requires the body. I just what I really like about this card. So this card's weird because it kind of does something that is kind of like Explorer's like missing, where it's missing like a Dreadbore. Obviously, Dreadbore is like
Hmm.
a cheaper card because it's only 2 mana you get to choose. But what I actually like about this card is that for 4 mana, you can almost like kill a creature in play and kill their planeswalker. So you can hit their Graveyard
Hmm.
Trespasser and their Liliana all in one hit with this card for 4 mana. I actually think that this one is a lot better than we're giving it credit just for those two abilities. And then on top of that, imagine a world where you have a bunch of shitty cards in your hand, and then you just discard them, and then you
Yeah.
redraw. Or you're just like, oh, my opponent's tapped out. I don't know, give this card +8, +0, and kill you. And,
Right.
play my
Yeah.
Swiftspear, pump it up, and you're dead.
I think you're exactly right. I think of all the commands that we've seen so far, of the 4 that we've seen, I think this is one of the stronger ones, because of that flexibility. And that's like, but the difference is the effects here scale because it's X. So this kind of gives me Shadow Skull Smashing vibes, because you can like pump a ton of mana into it, and the more mana you pump in, the more damage you're going to deal across multiple targets. But in this case, the X counts for both. So, like you're saying, if they have, yeah, Graveyard Trespasser, it's still daytime. It's 3/3. They have a Liliana that maybe they just down ticked. So you're looking at, two targets that have less than 3 total damage that you need to apply to them. All right. Mistress Command, X equals 3. Target both of them. You have the discard to the ward, but whatever. And yeah, and just with one 4-drop, you remove 2 massive threats on the opponent's board. So that's great. And like you're saying, yeah, if they only have one target and you have a handful of cards in your hand you'd like to filter out, you can do that. If they have like one target and you don't have a body on board to buff, you can massage your hand a little bit while getting rid of the threat.
Yeah, Fable
Like
showed us that that ability is really powerful. We know
it
now, man,
is.
how powerful it is to
Absolutely.
just discard some cards and
Mm-hmm.
redraw. And this card is a removal spell. This can be two removal spells. Like it's,
Oh, totally.
I think this
Well,
card's really strong.
and right now I'm running Cathartic Pyre in a couple of my Reanimator decks just because of that secondary discard draw mode. This is going to replace that almost immediately.
Yeah,
Like I think this is better than that. Because just the dig that you get off that is insane. The
It's up
amount
to
of
as
cards
well.
you
You
can
don't
hit.
have to discard the X. It's up
Yeah,
to, so you
it's
can just
perfect.
discard a couple cards or one card if you really wanted to. Like
Yeah.
I expect this card to get played in standard. Other formats,
Hmm.
I'm not sure. Like I said in Explorer, it's almost a card that you want because other cards don't exist right now, the Pioneer versions of them. But I mean, I still think it's really good. Like, yeah, kill your card, kill your Planeswalker. Like, that's so strong.
Hmm.
Like, this is a card that I've wanted for a long time. A card that cleanly
Hmm.
deals with Planeswalkers and
Right.
punishes your opponent severely for other things. And this does it all. I just Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the better commands we've seen so far.
Hmm.
It's also one of the ones that's more relatively cheaper as well in terms
True.
of how it scales.
Hmm.
Our next one here, we have Gix's command, 3 colors, double black sorcery. Choose 2, put 2+1/+1 counters on up to 1 creature, gains lifelink until end of turn. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. Um, it's a it's a weird. What I find really interesting so far about all three of these commands is that they're trying to put abilities on them that are good for everything. Like they
Hmm.
have the aggressive ability, the mid-range ability, they have the control ability, and that's kind of where we're at with this card, right? Where the first ability is okay, it's aggressive. I get to put 2 counters on a creature. I get to gain life. You can also say that that could also be a defensive play where you're gaining some life. Well, the second
Hmm.
ability is a board wipe. The third ability is return 2 creature cards, which is a mid-range type of effect. And then the
Hmm.
last ability is a control effect, right, where your opponent has to sacrifice a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. So you're almost always hitting their best card, quote unquote, or the most threatening card.
Right.
What I find missing about this card, it doesn't say Planeswalker. So I think that that's
Yes.
actually like a huge downside to this card already that I'm seeing. And Ham,
Hmm.
we talked about the enchantment earlier that it was a +1/+1 to your team, and that
Hmm.
card being detrimented because there's a wedding announcement. I'd rather just cast Invoke for 5 mana. For 5 mana,
Yes.
for your bang for buck, Invoke's way better than Gix's command.
Yep. Now, Invoke, it does have the 4 black pips, but yeah, if the deck you're in isn't concerned about that, because you just have like mana fixing treasure tokens, whatever the case may be, then yeah, no, 100%. Invoke still wins. I
Oh
like the
yeah.
fact that when it comes to this command, I like the fact that there is 2 removal modes. There are 2 removal modes. Like there's the sweeper. So if your opponent has, it's a sweeper, but it's based on power. So in a wedding announcement meta, there's a really good chance, like in the kind of games where you will want that ability, where you want to be able to sweep small creatures, there's a chance they're all going to be 3/3s by the time you can get to this anyway. So that's going to feel really bad. But yeah, it just is what it is.
I mean, it has the upside of like you can play around the sweeper by pumping up one of your creatures.
Hmm.
It's really good. I think it's a lot. It's not as bad as we're making it out to be. I think even in a wedding announcement type of meta game, I think let's say they just have the one wedding announcement, they made some tokens, and then they flip the Fable, and then you play
Hmm.
this, and you pump up your creature. You're like, oh, I got, I already had a graveyard trespasser, or oh, I have my own goblin token or Fable. How about I just
Hmm.
pump that up and then wipe the board, and then now I can attack cleanly, or now I have my own threat on the battlefield, and my opponent, just lost everything that they pretty much had. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's definitely this is another card I'm expecting to be better when the other cards in the format rotate. This
Sure.
is going to be a lot better when Invoke's not there. When you're right, some of these other cards that pump up cards aren't there anymore. Like I think that that's where this card's going to shine right now. It's a very hard yes for this to get played because
Hmm.
if anything, it's more of like a cyborg card where it's a really weak meat hook. It only kills
Right.
cards with power 2 or less. So, um, it's a lot different of a card than Invoke, but it's not as powerful as Invoke. So I don't really expect this to get played right away, and I also
Hmm.
don't. It's going to be hard for me to be convinced that this card will get played eventually. In all
Yeah.
honesty, it's not doing enough. For 5 mana, like it's not. We're so used to
Yeah.
commands and
Yeah.
charms ending the game, right? When they get played, like
Right.
even when you play like a Kolaghan's command, you're like, holy shit, they just 2-for-1 me. The game's it made me discard, and they got back the card I killed
Hmm.
earlier. So now I'm like screwed. Like
Oh yeah, K Command's brutal, and yeah, Gix is
these cards aren't doing that.
these cards are nowhere near that. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I do like how with some of them, like Mishra's command is all with the extension with the exception of the card filtering mode, all of them are like blow up a thing or like hurt a thing. That's like all the modes do. With Gix's command, each one is wildly different. You either have like a bad path of peril, you have a pump, you have a double, raise dead effect, and then you have like kind of a crappy soul shatter. Like you're saying, it doesn't hit planeswalkers, which really is a problem. But um, yeah, it's all good. And actually, there is also another there's another play here that would be kind of awkward. Like the situation would really have to be desperate, but you could theoretically put the 2 counters on your opponent's creature to make sure that it is the one that has the highest power, so they have to sacrifice it. If there's a particular creature that's a little more
Yeah.
threatening. Just throwing that out there. It's a very weird line. It's not going to come up often, but
It's a hard 5-mana removal spell.
yeah, exactly. It's like it's not great. It's not what you want to be doing, but
But
maybe
we'll
there's
probably
one
see it
game
on
that's relevant.
coverage.
I don't know.
You know, we'll probably see it on
Exactly.
coverage at some point in the
We'll
tournament.
see those moments. That makes the highlight reel exactly. So the one thing I just in general, I guess the one thing I like about commands is flexibility and being able to be creative while you're playing. That's something that they give you that is really cool. So I like that. I like the idea of Gix's command, but it's just too expensive. Like this exact card as printed could have cost 4, and I would have thought it was fine. You know, like decent, probably playable at 4. At 5, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that's the outside of the red one, which like we
Yeah.
said is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
kind of good at any time. Both the white one and this black one so far, like they're just all contradictory things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like they're just like, what? Let's just slap some abilities and give it some value. Like these cards obviously say, hey, look, there's some value. It's a 2-for-1, or it's a 3-for-1, or it's an
Mm-hmm.
X-for-1. It's even more than that. But at the same time, like they're not doing enough. These cards aren't doing anything that's impressive. Like
Right.
it's not cheap enough that you're really gonna get ahead.
No.
And I think that that's the problem with this one and the white one. Is that like
Right.
maybe if the white one was like 2 mana, maybe it'd be better, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think these like the black one and the white one so far are just too weak.
Actually, I'm realizing something. Each one of these modes is a spell that already exists in different ways. So the first one is actually Essence Infusion from Strixhaven, the putting 2 counters and then give lifelink to end a turn.
Okay.
The destroy creature, that's the destroy each creature. Oh, I was thinking Path of Peril, but Path of Peril keys off mana cost. Um,
There's something like Destroy the Meek or something like that, right? From original, maybe it's
that
3 or
sounds right.
less.
Yeah,
Consume the Meek. I think that one was
yeah,
like 3 or less mana cost, so never mind.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's all good. And then then you have Urborg Repossession, Return of it's a little different than Urborg Repossession, but it's 2 Raised Dead stapled together.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then a crappy Soul Shatter. So
Yeah, really crappy Soul Shatter that doesn't hit Planeswalkers. It's just not.
right.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
I don't
It's not
know.
good enough.
It's just not good enough. Yeah.
Speaking of not good enough, our next one isn't good enough either. Uh, a nice segue there. Urza's Command. Poor Urza's literally just getting some shit cards this set. They're just
He
like,
really is.
they're like,
Yeah, it's a bummer.
Urza's losing this war anyways. May as well just give him the shitty cards. So Urza's Command, 2 colorless, 2 blue for an instant. You get to choose 2 abilities. Oh boy, do we got some abilities for you.
Oh
Creatures you don't control get -2, -0 until end of turn. Create a tap Power Stone token. What a classic ability that everyone loved. Create a tapped 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Finally, a real ability.
That was okay.
And then
Yep.
scry 1 and draw a card. Wow, opt. Wow, opt. Wow, opt. No way. No, this card's too OP.
Whoa.
OP. Ban it right away. OP.
So
too,
you're saying
too good.
that this gives you an opt and one of the saga chapters on a land in Modern. Sweet, we're doing it. Let's go.
I swear, like you're gonna be so happy if your opponent's like, yeah, end step, they tap 4 mana, you're like, oh man, Deluge, and they're like, Urza's Command, make a Power Stone, scry 1, draw a card, and you're like, what?
What just happened? Yeah.
You're like,
exactly.
You're spending how much mana to do what?
Yeah. Like, I mean, the construct token there, that Karnstruct, as they're sometimes referred to, like that gets bigger if you have artifacts. Like in certain decks that can be good, but
this card sucks.
it sucks, man. Like if you have a 4 mana instant in blue, it better do 1 of 2 things, preferably both. It needs to either put 2 cards in your hand somehow, a la Memory Deluge or that kind of thing, or it needs to counter stuff, preferably both. You know, like, and this just goes nowhere near that.
I want to
It's
see
not even close.
I want to see a Remy video where he's Cryptic Command And they're like, "Hey, Cryptic, we're totally gonna reprint a new blue command. You're gonna be so happy to see it." And then Cryptic Command's like, ooh, does it
Ooh, oh
counter
my
a
god.
spell? And they're like, no. And
Oh
it's like, ooh,
no.
does it tap all their creatures? No. Does it draw a card? And they're like, yeah, I mean, it draws a card, sure.
Kind of draws one.
It's
Yeah.
like, ooh, does it bounce a permanent? They're like, no, we got one better. It makes a Power Stone. And it's like, get out of my house before I call the
Exactly.
police.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like, just don't exist.
Oh
Stop.
yeah, no,
It's
no.
like, get
Cryptic
out.
Command is definitely embarrassed of yeah,
There's
of
this
this one
command.
for sure.
What a this one. Oh, this one hurt. Like when I read it, I
Hmm.
was like, come on, it could have just been like, I don't know, man. Just push it. Just push the limit on these, right? Like push them. They're
You could have.
spells. Like push them. Like
Yep.
make them strong. Like besides the red one, which even the red one isn't like that absurd. It's still going to be like 4 mana before you really get to do something with it, probably. Or 3 mana maybe at the cheapest, but
Hmm.
I don't know. All these cards, like the blue one, the black one, the white one, so far are very disappointing. Like the blue one, even if it was negate, I think it would have been really good because you could have a
Hmm.
play where yeah, you counter their planeswalker, and then maybe you get to make a token that'll be like a 3/3 or 4/4 when you get to untap because maybe you've already made some other power stones or you have like a bank buster or two laying around.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that's really all this card is that you're just gonna be like, oh, I make a construct and scry one, draw a card, and then maybe some games you're like, haha, I got my opponent because I was able to give -2 to all their cards. But I think this card, in all honesty, man, I think this card really sucks.
Yeah.
And we've seen two sucky cards in the Gixis command and the Kayla's command, and I think this one's worse than both of them. I think that those other two cards are
Hmm.
more playable than this. I just even post rotation where memory deluge doesn't exist, you don't want to play this card.
Hmm.
Like
No, still no. Yeah.
I'd rather play deluge. I'd rather play another impactful like silver scrutiny.
Yep.
Still draws you two cards at 4 mana and it's an instant. This card sucks, right? Like it's not just me, but
No, it's not, dude. I'm 100% on board because it took like two of the modes are the least impactful things that blue is capable of doing right now in creating a power stone, which I think people are sleeping on power stones to some degree, but not enough to justify this. Um, but like the power reduction thing that blue does, I mean, it's just no. Like I don't. eh,
just
It's just
just
it's not
just
good.
stop.
It doesn't
Just
remove creatures. I have to spend cards to get like crappy part of a fog kind of. Like I don't like that. Like the power reduction thing I just don't like. It is almost never worth it. I have never seen a blue power reducing card that didn't have something else attached to it that was actually playable. Like I can't think of any.
yeah, I think it should have been like negate, return a
Mhm.
non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then the last two abilities on this still would have been fine. Because it still would
Yep.
have felt like a regular blue command where you do something and you get to draw a card. Like, listen, the scry one and draw a card is a nice little bonus. A lot of the times where you have commands
Sure.
like this, you're pretty happy just cantripping, getting the effect. So no matter what, you get a 2 for 1. So that's fine. Like, and like you said, the construct's fine. It's just those first two abilities just suck so bad. Like, you
Mhm.
almost have no reason to like want to do it unless like I don't like these cards are rare. Like this card exists in the same world that destroy all creature effects exists. Why are you playing this card? Like what is
Yeah.
wrong with you? Like I don't. I think this card. That's how I feel. It's like if you're playing this, you're just losing the game. Like
Yeah.
you're not
One.
really doing anything. You're just blowing 4 mana, and
Mhm.
that's really about it.
Well, and if you're in like an Azorius control kind of situation or in like an Esper situation, you have Wandering Emperor too. Like
Oh,
this is
Wandering
competing for a
Emperor's
slot, and
way
like
better than this
that,
card.
there's no comparison. It's just there's absolutely no comparison. I completely agree. To be honest, I think if they wanted this to be like this, like I don't know, the Power Stone thing. I know they're pushing for the set, so whatever. The construct is fine. If they got rid of that like toughness reduction thing, like what I want to see is remove that, have it be bounce on non-land permanent or negate. One or the other. Or even like a remand effect. Like
Mm-hmm.
even if it was just like remove or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent or spell to its owner's hand, we get like, well, that's the divide by zero thing. That might be a little too powerful, but in any event, but I would like to see um instead of scry one, draw a card, what if it was just draw 2 cards? Like, what if it was just divination stapled onto this? Like, that would really bump this thing up significantly. Even if they leave the other modes untouched, being able to just get 2 cards and a construct that might not suck later,
Or ramp.
maybe.
Like, yeah, you're
Or
right.
some
Like,
ramp, yeah.
getting the Power Stone feels better because you're potentially hitting cards that you want to use that Power Stone towards. Yeah, I agree
Mhm.
100%. There's like definitely some modifications to this card that could make it a lot better. And I think that without those, this card is actually not really that great. Um, yeah, I really think it's just okay. I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
it's not. I don't expect this card to get played
No,
at all.
I don't either.
Really, it's not doing enough, and it, even in limited, this card like the
And
construct is
rare,
good.
yeah.
The construct's good. Instant
Sure.
speed, but it also comes into play tap, so you're not even like getting like you're not even like surprising anyone with like a good block. You're just like, oh, 4 mana, and my turn. This is kind of like how this card feels. It's
Yeah,
not good enough.
nothing takes the wind out of my sails harder when I see like a flash creature or an instant speed token generator and the creature comes in tapped. It's like, but come on, guys, that was the fun part, the ambush. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, just take it right out of them.
yeah. No, man, so close to being decent. Yeah, yeah. And also, I just want to point out, it's a shame, because all the art that we've seen so far for this set is gorgeous, but I really like this piece. I think the
Also, make a
combination.
sick thumbnail, right?
Oh my goodness,
This would
yes.
be a
Like,
sick
yeah.
thumbnail.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But
Like that in the
instead,
background, like
it is trash.
gorgeous. It is trash. Well, there you go. So what
Completely
you do is you
unplayable.
put that as the thumbnail with the heading "This is trash." So that's the
There you go. That's how you
gotta get
do it.
the clickbait, baby. Get it? Yes.
Let's go, baby. So that actually is all the cards so far that's spoiled. For me, so far like my MVPs, like, we got Teferi, Gix,
Mhm.
Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. I think Titania is really good. Felden, the Mishra's Command, Monastery Swiftspear. Um, I think that the Mishra that melds is really good.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
Well, we also have Surge Engine, that little blue level up
yeah, Phyrexian Dragon
artifact.
Engine's really good.
Yep.
Astronaut's
Yeah.
Harvester for an uncommon. Yeah, you said the Surge Engine. Yeah, another card that's
Yeah. Yeah.
good. The Painlands and Blast Zone. Argoth is just okay. I think that all those are the cards so far that um, are striking out to me as some of the better
Hmm.
cards so far that we've seen. Obviously, we haven't even really seen that much of this set yet, really. Um,
No, there's still a lot more to come. Yeah.
yeah, there's still a ton of the set to come, and we've seen a lot of mythics so far, so that's kind of
Hmm.
cool. But I'm still expecting a lot of cards that are probably like some top tier commons and uncommons because if
Hmm.
this is some of the power levels, some of these mythics and rares, then I'm expecting some of these uncommons to slap.
Yeah.
So we'll and Swiftspear is one of them. So I mean, if that's the
Switch.
power level that they're
Yes.
trying to go for, then we know that there's definitely gonna be some cards that are gonna make an impact in standard. I mean, all of the cards I touched on already, I think are gonna have an impact on standard somewhere.
Yeah.
And even if
Absolutely.
some more eternal formats like Explorer, things like that. So definitely be on the lookout for this set. I think it's going to be another really, really fun set. And so far, I'm impressed with what I've seen.
Yeah.
Would
I'm
you
right
say
there
the
with
same,
you.
Ham?
Yeah, totally. And my big takeaway is I love how the big bombs that we're seeing don't all align with the same type of strategy. Granted, at the end of the day, black is getting a ton of action. Like black and red is getting quite a bit that we've seen so far. Um, but I mean, like the big planeswalker that we were talking about that can completely take over the game is blue. So who knows? Like that might be interesting. We have Swiftspear back in the mix. Titania is a real curveball compared to everything else we got going on, which kind of makes sense from a flavor perspective because she was kind of the outsider that didn't care about the war that kind of got dragged into it because her homeland kind of got swept up in the conflict. So that kind of makes sense that she's like the one person who's like, I don't care about artifacts, get that stuff out of here. I care about the land. Like I think that's interesting. Um, so that's kind of fun. And actually even I'm even thinking about it more, her flavor as she arises, she restores the land that was destroyed. So like that's pretty dope, actually. Just throwing that out there. Again, flavorfully, top notch. Love it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's going to be interesting
yeah.
to see where like a card like that fits. I mean, like I said, it's a
Hmm.
mythic. It does a lot. Like it has relevant abilities. I feel like that, almost every color is getting a boost.
Yeah.
Outside of black and red are kind of just getting some cards that are blatantly obviously going to get played.
Yeah,
Like the
and they didn't
Flesh
need any help.
Gorger, the
Let's
Gix.
be honest. They were doing fine already,
Ugh,
but
I'm gonna get so tired of Gix into Shieldred. I'm just gonna be
that's
just like, what are we doing? Why is this still happening? Yeah, that
yeah.
where they go sleeper, underdog, Gix, Shieldred, you're just gonna like be in some pain as your lands come into play tapped and you're helpless.
You know,
That's kind of how I feel.
one nice thing about Gix though, we just might see fewer graveyard trespassers or Lilianas, just because the 3-drop slot is getting awfully crowded in that black deck. So we'll see.
Yeah, probably. I'm thinking Liliana first.
Yeah, I probably cut
Trespasser is
Liliana
such
before.
a
Trespasser's so
gas
good. That card is
card.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to be the person that loses to that 7 ability on Gix, where my opponent
Dude.
gets to cast like 3 or 4 cards off the top of my deck, and then I'm like, wow, would have been cool to top deck those, huh?
Yep.
As my opponent plays a Fable, Bankbuster, and like 2 other cards, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what a
Neat.
way to
Yeah,
lose.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, neat, cool trick, opponent.
Ooh. Okay.
I mean,
Delightful.
I guess they deserve to win if they're discarding that many cards and paying
Yeah,
7 mana.
yeah,
So
exactly. If they dump their hand to if they spend 7 mana and dump their hand, they better be getting something good. So
yeah.
what I would love is for them to hit that land pocket I was about to draw through. That would be pretty awesome.
They hit like 3 lands and a card that searches for a land, and you're like, "Ooh, that was close."
Success. All right.
And then you
Yeah.
top deck your Flesh Gorger. But there's
Right.
gonna be
Exactly.
times
Like
where your
that.
opponent hits
Oh.
2 Flesh Gorgers, and you're gonna be like, "I hate you so much."
Right. Exactly. Like yeah, that's absolutely gonna happen.
Like,
But we've all had that when we're going up against mill and you watch the card like mill away that you needed. It's like oh, but then you have plenty of other times where they mill a bunch of lands and then draw exactly what you need. So yeah,
it happened to me the other
it
day. I was
goes both
playing
ways.
against Rogues and Explorer, and one of the games I was able to get Rest in Peace down, which was nice. And then
Nice.
the Rest in Peace got milled in the 3rd game, but I still killed them anyways because my draw was good. So it, like,
Nice.
didn't matter. But yeah, I thought things like that are always like kind of interesting where you're like, I'm just need to hit the one thing. And then nowadays 2022 Magic's like, oh, I will just take your cards, I guess, so you don't draw them. Oh, you're trying to
Right.
find an answer, let me draw it before you do.
Yeah, that's nuts.
We see that with the blue black card. I forget what it's called.
Siphon Insight.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
Siphon Insight. Yeah.
I've run a handful of decks running Siphon Insight, and it's excellent. Like that
Yep.
card, a lot of people are sleeping on that card right now. It
Oh
is
yeah,
really good.
definitely like a
Yeah.
mirror breaker, and kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
card that is better as the game progresses, where you're able to screw your opponent's draw and take their best cards at the same time.
Yep. And there was something really satisfying about like spending removal that you stole from your opponent to get rid of their big threat or like beat them to death with their own creature. Like it's kind of fun. I'm not gonna lie. I absolutely do that. And it's delightful. Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, so far I think this set's going to be a lot of fun. Definitely let us know what you think in the comments down below. I do appreciate you coming to join us here this far into the video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, bell notification, like the video, and comment down below. You can find links to my content and HamHocks42's content in the description below, as well as information on the tournaments that we host monthly. Thanks to our sponsors, MagicJank.com and the comic book store. So definitely be on the lookout for all those links below, and I hope that you stay cheesy. See you next time, everybody.